of silly joke, which was, I mean, originally it was just Moby Dick with moles instead of whales, and I sort of in parallel I'd always been interested in trains and train fiction, but trying to do something, trying to get away from the idea of trains meaning incredibly narrow directionality. So trying to think of how do you have trains but still have a sense of the proliferation of all possibilities. And then all the stuff about the kind of desertness and the dryness kind of followed from that. The peg for that conceit was largely just the kind of endless discussions about, you know, what does Moby Dick represent? What is the meaning, capital M, of this symbolic beast, this thing that is both an animal in the book and also a kind of free-floating, kind of massively freighted symbolic, sack. And I don't want for one second to imply some kind of anti-intellectual gore-blimeyism. I'm not saying, all this philosophizing, what a waste of time. Quite the contrary, I love theory, I love these debates. But that doesn't mean you can't tease it, and that doesn't mean that you can't sort of play around with it. And so I like the idea, it sort of seems like when you have these kind of enormous epic narratives, it seems like the kind of natural evolution, roughly, is, and this gets to what you're talking about with hunting, because hunting itself is such a kind of monumentally sort of symbolically fraught activity. The natural evolution is character, non-existent character in book, hunts thing X, reader and scholars interpret thing X as thing Y, and I sort of thought, why not just short circuit that and have the hunter both hunt thing X but also just jump straight to the bit about thinking about it as thing Y at the same time, so you can both be the hunter and the philosopher of your own hunting all at once. It's just more efficient. For any book I'm writing, the thing I have to try and do is try and get into a voice, and sometimes that happens within a couple of chapters, sometimes it takes, but you know at a certain point if you've hit the voice, because it starts to come very kind of quickly and naturally, and if you don't hit that voice, then you should probably shelf that book for a while. And what happens, and I'm quite sure you find it the same, and what happens every so often, and in looking at my books, it seems to be about every 4 or 5 books, I have an idea which very quickly I realise is more playful at a level of affect, but also very much at a level of language and wordplay, in a way that I feel sort of restrained and a bit constipated about doing it until I start to think about telling it to my own younger self. And then I feel freed up. And I just kind of go and I riff, and it is a certain kind of playfulness. Now, I'm not saying for a moment that there are writers that couldn't write with that kind of playfulness very much with adult readers in mind. I'm certain there are, I know there are. But for me, the way through that kind of initial sort of hesitancy is by realising that I'm talking to my own 10-year-old, 12-year-old self. And then it becomes just great sort of pleasure. And that's the point at which I realise that I'm writing a book that particularly has younger readers in mind. What does sort of frustrate me sometimes is that there are a certain set of kind of received opinions which are often not questioned about, as you say, the question of kind of ornamentation in prose, the desirability of a chimera called spare prose or precise prose, these really meaningless adjectives that, there is no prose which is precisely like the world. They are, ontologically distinct categories. And my argument has never been that a sort of inversion of the hierarchy and saying that Rococo prose is somehow better. I don't think that at all. What I do think is that the stated reasons for the desirability of a certain kind of prose are actually not, for the most part, are not reasons at all. They're simply givens, and I really do like when talking to students to sort of try and encourage them to question the givens. Now, you can actually construct quite interesting philosophies that really do become arguments. That you can say, well, here is why a minimalist prose is more honourable or more democratic or more whatever than purple prose. I don't buy it, but I at least respect that it's a genuine debate, you know, and then I can turn around and turn it on the other way and formulate a militant philosophy of adjectives, you know. But I'm interested in having those debates. What I do get a little impatient with is the simple given, you know, kill your darlings, kill the adverbs, kill the adjectives, you know, spare is better. But like, why? You know, you simply want to ask the question, why? Why is that given? And my sense is that is shifting. I think people are I think that we are slightly over the hump of the kind of hegemonic assumption of a certain type of soi-disant precise prose. I think people are a little bit more reflective and thoughtful than they were maybe a few years ago. It's quite common in our field, for example, for someone to criticise a book by saying, oh, you know, I enjoyed it, but, you know, I didn't understand why the world was the way it was. Now, at a kind of, you know, reader response level, if that's how they feel, that's how they feel. But that needn't be the end of the discussion. I mean, you can easily ask, well, why do you need a coherent world? What is going on why is that self-evidently a desideratum? And I think simply opening up those questions, even if you retain the same opinion, but actually being prepared to discuss that, it just has to be good.
Yeah.
I was, on the one hand, when I was a reader in my just pre-teens and teens and so on, and indeed now, I never enjoyed nonsense. I liked surrealism, but I never particularly warmed to sort of Lear-esque nonsense. On the other hand, I think by nature, coming out of sort of Dungeons and Dragons and that kind of thing, I tend towards maybe the surplus systematization, and I think as I get older, I try and kind of fight against a lot of my own proclivities, not because there's anything ignoble about them, but simply because I know if all you ever do is surrender to your own proclivities, you become a self-parody very quickly. And in this particular case, the kind of, you know, working out of, you know, every detail of the map so that the map becomes more important than the narrative was something I didn't want to do. So quite deliberately, I started with a set of narrative and an arc before then kind of working out, you know, what was needed in terms of the world, and I also often do things quite deliberately, like leave sections of the map blank or leave sections of the timeline blank, which is partly, I mean, I don't think it's laziness. I mean, it's partly it's just a question of allowing you room to kind of breathe and kind of constantly reminding you that it's not just that you don't have to fill everything in. It will be counterproductive if you fill everything in. You know, that's a petard I set up myself to hoist myself on. I mean, it's one of those things that it was a throwaway phrase I used in an interview once, where I said, I want to do a novel in every genre, which then never died as a quote. But what happened is what quite often happens. I'm sure not just to me, where I kind of read back my own words and said, oh, that's an awesome idea, yeah, you should totally do that. So what starts as a piece of kind of sort of off-the-cuff swagger becomes something a little bit more thoughtful, you know. And so I am now interested in that, although I, reserve the right to change my mind. I mean, I do think genres are fascinating, and I'm... to a certain extent, any debate about, what's the edge of genre, where does genre end and literature begin? I mean, these are pretty fruitless arguments unless one defines one's terms really, really carefully from the word go. I mean, the danger of simply talking past each other is enormously great. And so, for me, I think genre is a useful heuristic. I think it is something that is helpful in terms of making sense of lived literature, and it's a kind of